Well, hi, Squirrel. Uh,
Hi there, Jeffrey.
Welcome to our DevOps Enterprise Summit presentation. Looking forward to that. For the audience, I'm Jeff Fredrick. I am the managing director of a fintech company in London and also a consultant and executive coach.
And I'm Squirrel, and that is actually my name. And I live in England where I'm a consulting CTO, and I've worked with something like 90 organizations in the last 5 years on all kinds of transformations and improvements, which is the sort of thing we're going to talk about with you today. And of course, together, we wrote a book.
Yep, published by people you may have heard of, the IT Revolution.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
So we launched that earlier this year, and very happy with the response and being part of the IT Revolution family.
Although we'll say a bit later about why we're not quite as happy with the response. There's something missing, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. And this is something that we've picked up since launch. So we've had some really good feedback from people happy with the book, but there's something about the dynamics aren't quite right. And structure and dynamics was something as a bit of vocabulary that I personally picked up from this DevOps Enterprise Summit community for me back in the London DevOps Enterprise Summit
London.
virtual. Yeah, London, the virtual event earlier in this year. And what was really key for me was Dr. Stephen Spear. He was a keynote in London earlier this year as well. And he shared some excerpts from his book, High Velocity Edge, which were just really fantastic. And I went and bought it and read it. And it has become one of my top now recommendations to executives who are looking to understand the kind of organization that they want to have if they want to be what I would have in the past called like a learning organization, now high velocity organization, really just operational excellence. And the term here, structure and dynamics, I think are very interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of other conversations about that in the IT Revolution community, both here at DevOps Enterprise Summit, and also if you listen to Gene Kim's Ideal Cast, this is something that's come up many times. And I'm going to just sort of narrow it down to structures are the things we put in place, are the things that we do, and dynamics are what result.
So like structure would be having a stand-up.
Exactly.
That's what you need. You need a stand-up, and you need lean methods, and you need DevOps methods. As long as you have those, you're fine, right?
Well, yes and no, but mostly no. This is the challenge, and this is what makes having a really high-performing organization so challenging. Is that we can't just copy the cookbook from somewhere else. We can't look around to somewhere else to find the best practices and put them in place and get the same results.
Because so Kubernetes and retrospectives, those are not going to do it for me.
They're not enough. They're not sufficient. So it's not that there isn't valuable information in other people's experiences. We can learn a lot from the structures in other places, but we always have to keep in mind about the dynamics. Are we getting the dynamics, the results that we want? And this interplay between structures and dynamics, for you and I school, often the gap between these, when we work with people and they're having trouble when they're trying the right structures or interesting structures or changing their structures, but they're not getting the dynamics.
Aha, I know if I get the Spotify model, that'll be enough.
Yeah, that there's some really important elements that come down to conversations. And that is where our point is. Now, this idea of structure and dynamics, for me, that's a very close tie to the Cynefin model. And people who are coming across this for the first time, they'll see this Cynefin. Like you have a good like tip for how to pronounce it correctly, right?
It's easy to do. Although if you here's another tip. If you want to make sure people remember your framework, don't use Welsh to name it, because this is the only word of Welsh I know. You say the word Kevin and you say n in the middle, so it's Cynefin. Yeah. That's how you pronounce this goofy word. But the helpful idea that comes from this theory that we want to focus on here is just a little piece of the whole picture. The whole thing is really valuable as a way of understanding how systems work, especially their dynamics. How are they changing over time, and how are the elements evolving? The one we want to focus on is the complex domain, which is the one where you do know that there's a connection between what you're doing and what the effects are. There is some connection. Nobody seems to know what it is. So unlike some of these other domains, and these things have changed their names and so on, this itself is a dynamic framework. But the idea is that when you move into the complex domain, and that's usually the domain of humans and startups and rapidly evolving situations, exactly what High Velocity Edge is all about. The situation that you're in there is one in which it's most helpful to do something and then see what happens. So they call that probe, sense, respond. I might call it ready, fire, aim. So you start trying something, you figure out whether it worked, and then you respond by adjusting. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Agile software development and DevOps and all of these wonderful things are supposed to give us. The problem is that we keep using structures that don't involve any probing and certainly not any responding in the way we're implementing them. And then we're kind of surprised by the fact that like our system didn't adapt. We didn't get better.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that's the challenge, is that when people don't take the systems view, that don't understand that there's an emergent property, and that's what these dynamics are. They're the emergent property of the organization from the structures we put in place. They're only focused on the structures and not sensing that emergent dynamic property. Now that's I think where people fall down, is that they're not understanding how to move back and forth from sensing the dynamics that are occurring, trying experiments with the structure, and seeing the new dynamics and back and forth. Now, there's one other thing that I found interesting when I went back to this paper. This is the 2003 version of Cynefin, and I'm sure people here have looked at more recent versions. If you go to Wikipedia or something, you'll find different labels, as Squirrel mentioned, for the domains. But the idea is still the same. And one thing I found very fascinating about this complex domain, and I've highlighted it here, is that when we're dealing with this place where it's